And it's my sincere pleasure to have with us today and to introduce to you Jonathon Jafari, who's the Senior Director of Business Development at the Center for Drug Research and Development. And the acronym for that organization is CDRD. They're also a network of centers of excellence, but they're a center of excellence for the commercialization and research. So they're a CSER NCE. AllerGen's a classic research NCE. But Jonathon, welcome. Jonathon is the Senior Director of Business Development, and he has extensive experience in progressive business development, strategy marketing, strategic market evaluation, new product planning in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology sectors, and holds an MBA from Indiana University and an MS in biotechnology from Johns Hopkins. So he's sharing his expertise with us today and providing us with some insights on how best to identify and reach the potential end users or customers of our research outputs and our knowledge mobilization and commercialization initiatives jointly undertaken with our partner organizations. So, Jonathon, take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Diana and Marshall. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. And hopefully I'll be able to get my slides to work. Okay, there we go. All right. So, the focus of this presentation is really to look at who are our customers, and given that the attendees are researchers and groups that are actually doing active research in the area of allergies, inflammation, etc. I wanted to give a sort of overview of how we would look at a project in order to see if there's commercial value in that project, and also essentially how to position this for various stakeholders such as the patient groups, investors, researchers, biopharma, so that would be biotechs, investors for spin-outs, what regulators would be looking for, and ultimately what's the best for the patient and for healthcare systems. So when we're looking at a product market assessment, essentially, we're looking for novel targets, novel ways to look at treating patients with specific diseases. So obviously we're looking at what is the mechanism of action, what disease does this pathway affect, and I think, given some of the pathways and targets that your group looks at, they can be parts of many different diseases. Inflammation is a component of so many diseases. It's really more difficult to narrow down and really to look at which patients may benefit or which therapeutic areas would benefit. Which targets actually have relevant animal models in specific diseases, etc. So we also look at the number of patients who may benefit, and I'll go a bit more into that once that's a bit more of the specialty for asthma that we're going to look at today. What's the unmet need, the competitive landscape, the pricing. I think pricing has been a very big focus point these days in terms of rare disorders and the high price of drugs, and I think that's going to continue to happen over time, and that we're really going to have to demonstrate value for the products that we put forth to the market. The regulatory pathway is very important in terms of understanding the preclinical and clinical aspects of drug development for your specific project. Health economics are important, not only for the payers, but also for the patients as well, and the payers in terms of what they're going to be looking for you to demonstrate value with your research. So the example I'm going to use is asthma, because I think this is something that you look at every day. The way we look at these things is, what's the unmet need in a specific therapeutic area. We have a number of databases we can use. We also look at a lot of the literature in terms of searching for asthma, novel targets, those type of queries. We'll look on Twitter. We'll find bloggers who look at specific disease states, and they're sort of experts in terms of what's going on in the field and what's coming. Asthma is a very heterogeneous disease. But recently, over the past, say, 5 to 10 years, researchers and companies have looked at potential targets for patients with severe asthma. So the patients who are, currently not responding optimally to inhaler-based therapies. So, looking at some of the newer technologies, Xolair, which is an anti-IgE antibody for asthma, and some other diseases where IgE is a specific driver of the disease. Nucala, which is a anti-IL-5 antibody from GSK, just got approved. And so we have a bit of information about that one too. So looks like I've lost my ability to see where to go next. So Marshall, could you advance? There we go. All right, so the asthma market. So this is from Evaluate Pharma. This is a database that CDRD subscribes to. It's a very comprehensive pipeline database, as well as has great information about markets, patents, some deals, and also some venture investment. So there's a couple databases that we subscribe to. We have Evaluate Pharma, and we also have Recombinant Capital, which actually goes through the deals that we can filter based on academic deals, biotech deals, pharmaceutical deals, and then which therapeutic area, what type of molecule, that type of thing. So this is a summary slide on the asthma market. And so if you look at the large blue, that's largely generic. So that's inhalers, corticosteroids, etc. The GSK inhibitor, the combination inhibitor, has got a share of the market. Seretide Advair from GSK is going to be decreasing in terms of sales as it goes off patent. But if you look at the red and then the light blue, so those are biological targets looking at the unmet need in terms of severe patients. So eosinophilic asthma is being hit by Xolair, and then Nucala is IL-5, and that's driven by another pathway as well. And we'll go into how the companies are really segmenting asthma in order to identify unmet needs and have specific therapeutics which are specific to the patients that need them, most likely to benefit, and then most likely to be reimbursed. So I guess next slide. Oh, there it is. I got it. Okay. So this is pretty interesting. There's so many asthma patients. We know it's a very common disorder, but this is from a Roche presentation that they gave in their R&D day pretty recently, I believe. And so for any drug that they have, they actually have the patient populations available where they see their drugs being used. And CDRD and other groups, we look for free information as much as possible. So the information in this type of presentation would cost on the order of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we look at presentations from the big pharma for their patient populations, but the best place to find these type of things is really from the smaller biotech companies where they go through their project and the potential market. So Roche is probably the only big pharma that does this that I know of. So. But really, you're looking at a moderate to severe market and uncontrolled severe asthma. And then ultimately, you're going to be looking for specific targets. So on the next few slides, I'll go through some of that. All right, so Roche has a couple of projects. So they have the Xolair, and they have another antibody behind this for a different target. But this is the sales for Roche, which is in the green, and then Novartis, which is their partner on the program. Sales have continued to go up relatively slowly, mostly due to reimbursement. So, one of the things that I looked at was, how well is Xolair reimbursed? And for example, in the UK, there's an organization called NICE, which actually does a health economic evaluation of all expensive drugs, especially. And they actually turned down Xolair initially, but after some negotiation with Roche and Novartis, they've actually allowed the drug to be reimbursed for specific patients. So they want to, they'll let drugs be in the market for a while, then they'll do an evaluation, and then they'll actually turn down very expensive drugs until that you can actually identify the true patients that are going to benefit and understand the value for the healthcare system. All right, so this is the reimbursement for Ontario, so the Exceptional Access Program for Asthma. And this is just an example of what payers are looking for before they'll reimburse your drug. So Zafirlukast or Accolade Xolair. These are actually, I think Xolair definitely should be generic very soon, but at the same time, the payers are looking to limit the access until it's truly needed. So there's a sort of a stepwise program. Patients that can't deal with an inhalation device, pediatric patients especially would fall into that space. Children with asthma. And then if you look at Xolair, which is in the range of $14,000 to $15,000 per year, that's really for the severe uncontrolled asthma in patients who've been hospitalized, urgent visits, and essentially there's a lot of patients, as you know, who actually die from asthma. So that's really the patient population that's being targeted by Xolair. So what's quite interesting is that reimbursement is such a big deal over time. An inhaler in the U.S. costs $250, and the same product in France is 7 times less expensive. And if you look at the New York Times article, you can look at all sorts of different products where the U.S. equivalent versus the equivalent, same product, but in a different territory in terms of how much cheaper it is. So I would expect that this will narrow down over time as the government is eventually allowed to negotiate prices. All right, so this is a slide from a publication which is looking at the different targets in asthma. It's a very complicated pathway, but if you're looking at various treatments, IL-17 antibody for MedImmune, anti-TNF alpha didn't work so well, but IL-18 is being developed. IL-13, IL-5 is the project from, I think I talked about earlier, and then MedImmune as well. So, different groups are looking at different portions of this cascade, or multiple cascades actually, to see which ones will work for specific patients. And I think this is an overview of type 2 asthma, and over time, a lot of diseases, including especially oncology, are being subdivided into different populations based on molecular targets. And I think that's going to continue. If you look at asthma, before you just had moderate to severe asthma. Now you're going to have eosinophilic, you're going to have neutrophilic. The same thing goes for cancer as well, where lung cancer, breast cancer used to be 1 or 2 subtypes, but now they're being subtyped into up to say 13 or more subtypes, and looking at various therapeutics and diagnostics as well. Yeah, so this is from MedImmune, and so they're looking at different types of asthma. This is their sort of R&D development type thing, and it's not really going to be defined this way from a patient market, et cetera, until these therapeutics are approved. You have a companion diagnostic, et cetera. So, but they're looking at all sorts of different types of therapies, and there may be some combination therapy, but given the expense of these therapeutics, they're really going to need to define which patients may benefit and what were the outcomes. So this is a Roche slide from their R&D presentation again. I believe it's on their investor presentation. So they go through the genetic identification of patients that are likely to benefit from the anti-IL-13 therapy, and the marker that they're looking at is periostin. And this is a great example of how they're going to characterize these patients, what the diagnostic is going to be, and then if you look at the next slide, you're really looking at what happens with these patients. So with the periostin high subjects, you see a significant change in terms of the breath. The ultimate success of this project, or this drug and the companion diagnostic, is predicated on getting this project approved. All right, so this is actually a real example of something that I looked at actually as an interview prep to come to CDRD. And so if you look at neutrophils, we know that they're important in many different disorders. We were looking at a specific GTPase and limiting the ability of neutrophils to move to areas of inflammation. So hoping to decrease their motility in specific areas and decrease the reactive oxygen species generation and killing. So this is, okay, so, you guys probably know much better than I do, what neutrophils do, what the issues are, and, there's a lot of groups that are looking at both turning on neutrophils from an immunotherapy standpoint for cancer and maybe some other indications, and also modulating them such that they go back to a quiescent state. And I think we'll see a lot of that going forward, not just in asthma, but also maybe for neutrophilic dermatosis and some other disorders as well. So we looked at strategies to inhibit RAC, significant potential in neutrophil-mediated diseases. Very competitive, so it's really important to understand, where your product may fit. We were looking at a potential high-throughput screen to identify small molecules because we thought that that would be the best way to look at this indication. So, with COPD and asthma, you could look at an inhaled formulation. And that's something we always look at in terms of the, the current treatments that are available for any type of disease, what the modality needs to be. Can it be injectable? Should it be an oral? Or in this case, we're looking at COPD and asthma, in that you're delivering a sort of a topical molecule that would inhibit the migration of neutrophils to the lungs. So in that way you would spare sort of the broad anti-neutrophil effects and have it be more of a localized treatment. Next, I can't see it. So neutrophils have been found to have a huge role in various inflammatory pulmonary disorders. And so, just due to the heterogeneous nature of all of these disorders, we've been looking at we and others have been looking at different ways to hit neutrophils and other cells such as Tregs, et cetera, for various disorders. So, yeah, I think I've probably mentioned this already, so this may be redundant, but researchers have really looked at these type of concepts in oncology to look for specific targets for severe asthma, and so the eosinophilic and the Th2-driven types of asthma. So neutrophils are commonly found in the sputum in asthmatics, especially severe asthma, and there's some good papers out there in terms of the number of neutrophils have been correlated with the severity of the disease. And they're, I think what's important is that they're actually resistant to conventional therapy. Eosinophilic, which is, I'd say, probably the normal asthma that some of us have had, childhood asthma, et cetera. It does respond pretty well to inhaled corticosteroid therapy. But, there are patients for which this is not the case, and they have a more severe phenotype. And so the GSK antibody as well as Xolair are targeted to these patients. And that's how we would really subdivide a program in order to look for the correct patient populations. So, looking at inhibiting neutrophil activity, there's sort of a graveyard of various therapeutics which have tried to target neutrophil activity, and I think a lot of that is due to the fact that they completely shut off neutrophil activity, and therefore you've got pretty significant side effects in terms of infections. The hope is that you would actually be able to do this locally, inhibit the neutrophils from doing their damage locally. But compared to other types of approaches where it may only affect chemotaxis but not the release. So that's where we, from initial research standpoint, that's where we would position this type of technology. And then we would test that with key opinion leaders and other groups, and then put that into what we call a target product profile, which is sort of the commercial way to look at, commercial and regulatory clinical way to look at any target that we're looking at. So we would have to, given that neutrophils are important in various disorders, we would typically look at a few of the diseases, but we're looking at the subsets that would respond to anti-neutrophil strategy. So asthma, it's a very small, 5 to 10%. COPD, we're not sure, so that's something we flagged as something we need to look at. Also for cystic fibrosis as well. So this is from the recombinant capital database that we use. So we look at what sort of deals are done, and we're looking for the type of projects that can be partnered at an earlier stage rather than a later stage, because given CDRD's capabilities today, we can't really take compounds or drugs into the clinic ourselves. So we're looking for preclinical deals for the most part. And so we looked at a number of different deals and understanding what the value was, and looking at, if we can, what animal models they looked at in order to see how our project may compare. And that's it. So I've got a bunch of sources here that I looked at for the asthma evaluation. And at the back, I think there's some which go through, yeah, some of the reimbursement from the Pharma Times in terms of Xolair. So it's a pretty good article in terms of, what payers and groups are looking for in order to both approve and to fund these drugs. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, John. We do have a number of people on the line, and some of them for whom this is a very directly relevant topic with the example that you've used of asthma. So I think we'll open it up, and I'll ask Marshall if anyone has put their virtual hand up to ask a question.
No hands yet, and no texted questions yet.
I'm going to take the opportunity to jump in then, John. John, this is a very detailed description of the kinds of information you need to source when you have a product. And so I'm going to ask you to go up about to the 90,000-foot level and say you're going to generalize this sort of strategy that you've laid out for us. What are the sort of take-home messages and lessons learned that cut across all drug types, all disease studies, all kinds of opportunities that might arise from a research result, regardless of whether it's asthma or some other area? What is the sort of overarching strategic priority steps that lie underneath this detailed analysis you've provided us with today?
Sure. I think the key thing is really to understand the unmet need in every disease that you're looking at. So I think sometimes groups will say, oh, there's 30 million asthmatics, but the reality is that not all of those patients are going to be your customers. Other examples would be rheumatoid arthritis. A lot of patients do relatively well on DMARDs and methotrexate, et cetera. And the ones that are getting the Humira or the anti-TNFs is a much smaller population. And understanding which patients would benefit from your therapy. What's the overall value? Is it going to be cheaper? Is it going to be safer? Is it going to be more effective in specific patient populations? Do you have a biomarker? All of that's very important to understanding the value of the projects that you're looking at. And ultimately, it's very important to get the feedback both from patient type groups as well as key opinion leaders, and also commercial key opinion leaders.
So it really behooves us to get out there and ask a lot of questions, talk to a lot of people, look at a lot of data. And there's really it sounds like there's no substitute for time in the chair to do that sort of analysis of the evidence about your customers, about your market, about your competitors?
Yeah, and I think, over time you get a really good awareness in terms of, what's going to be a viable project. For example, for CDRD, we look at, any therapeutic area at any given time, but there's therapeutic areas such as ophthalmology, where I used to work at QLT. I know in general, what's going to be commercializable at any given time, but there's other therapeutic areas where they ask me, what do you think? And I have no concept. So basically, I have a framework that I look to in terms of, the unmet need, the competition, the capabilities of the researchers here, and really take that for any project. So, some of them will take more time than others, but overall the framework is pretty helpful.
It's very transferable, I think.
Yes.
Marshall, any questions?
Still no questions.
Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay. I think you've probably had a wealth of experience in seeing people fail. We often hear the phrase "fail fast." If you're going to fail, fail fast, and then change direction and start, pick up with a new approach. What is the value that you've seen in the failures you've seen, and what are the takeaways in terms of why some products fail or why projects fail in terms of knowing their customers or being successful? Sure.
So, when we're looking at projects, I think some of the key experiments are very important. It could be whether it's a safety-related readout, or it could be an animal model. So, for example, we're looking at a project right now for inflammatory bowel disease and Crohn's. And, ultimately, we need an efficacy model in a relevant animal model. And so there's a few animal models for Crohn's, such as the DSS model, and I think anybody that's in the space knows how finicky that model is, how it changes in each lab, but it's sort of a gateway type thing. But we've also looked to go around those things and identify better models as they become available. So, for example, for Crohn's, we're looking at a salmonella model because that's the mechanism of action that we're looking at, whereas the DSS model won't work for us. So really understanding, what mechanism you're looking for and whether or not it's even translatable in the animal models or, in vitro models you're looking at is very important. And, understanding which groups can do the work for you, because I think we've had some issues is trying to develop all these models in-house, where we could have just gone to an academic or a CRO lab and done the relevant animal model quickly in a group that does them quite frequently. So that's, looking for the key killer experiment is very important. Other examples, we have a antibiotic program where it's for gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria. But we've, spoken to a number of different companies, et cetera, and they've all told us the same things. We need to do some target validation, and we need to do some relevant animal model experiments before coming to them. So understanding, what your, I guess, customers such as the biotechs, pharmas, et cetera, are going to need in order to see your project as something they might want to acquire or collaborate with you on is very important.
Mm-hmm. So that's very interesting. So companies want you to already have completed target validation and some tests and some relevant animal models before approaching them for investment or partnership.
It depends. Some of them are open to earlier. If it's a truly novel target for a hot area, and such as immunotherapy, you may be able to do a deal before true target validation. But others, where there's a really defined preclinical pathway, they want you to go on that pathway and demonstrate success.
Interesting. So what kind of advice do you find yourself giving most often to researchers who are on that commercialization pathway at an early stage at the level of the project?
Yeah, it's really understanding the value of your technology and not selling yourself short and not being, I think you need to be, humble. Being humble doesn't help you. but being overconfident and saying that your drug is going to cure everything is also not going to work. So really understanding, the mechanism, understanding the competitive landscape, and understanding where your project fits, and what its potential advantages are over the currently available and the other treatments that are currently being developed is key to get traction with external parties.
So you have to find that right balance of facts and enthusiasm.
Yeah, and getting validation, whether you get, if you're, we have projects where we have partnered with the MS Society, and then for JDRF. So the patient advocacy groups, that validates your program as well. Getting key opinion leaders in the field on board, very significant. And having granting agencies, et cetera, anything that'll validate your technology is very helpful.
What role do the patient advocacy groups play? Because that's very relevant for AllerGen. We have the Asthma Society of Canada. We also have the Food Allergy Canada and the AQAA and Allergy. There's others that are smaller as well, but those are the main ones. What role do they play, and how do you, in your experience, see them being involved at early stages?
Yeah, so I think their mandates are changing over time. So I think a lot of them, JDRF, MS Society, used to fund a lot of academic research, but when they speak to their patient groups, they also said they would like to see some translational work. So that's where we have partnered with them. We've done calls for proposals for progressive MS. So I think for MS in particular, there's been a lot of work in terms of the relapse-remitting type of MS. There's been drugs approved, but what they're looking at is more of the subtypes which are not currently well treated: primary progressive and secondary progressive MS. So they've come to us and they've put in $1 million fund, and they've actually asked us to identify projects. They've brought projects to us. They take the projects, they get them, they have a key opinion leader network that they vet each of the projects, and they also vet them with a group called Fast Forward, which is a MS Society group in the States, which funds companies within MS. So you sort of get a academic as well as a commercial evaluation of the projects. They're just driven to get a drug approved, whereas their mandate never changes. They're always looking for MS treatments until it's a cure, right? But the companies that we work with, to be fair, they're large pharmas. They change their minds quite frequently. They do reorganizations. So you never know exactly what's going to be attractive to them at any given time. We've had projects with specific companies where they've been very interested in the therapeutic area. We've delivered the results, and then by that time the head has left, and they've deprioritized the area. So, that's why you always have to know what the value is of your product, because you need to be able to take that to other parties as well.
That's been exactly our experience as well, where we really value those partnership opportunities with big companies and pharma. But we find as well that they change their mind frequently. You invest a lot in the relationship, and then somebody changes position, and it's out the window. So it is a constant challenge. I don't know if anyone on the call has had that kind of experience or has questions around best practices in managing those relationships and trying to foster continuity when there are changes of priority and changes of staff. But it might be a good time to speak to Jonathan about that, ask him his experience. How many company relationships does CDRD manage?
Yeah, so currently we have innovation funds with Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, Roche, Merck, and J&J, and we're hoping to add a few more. We have a fund with the Canadian MS Society, and then we have a lot of projects that we're actually looking at which are outside of the interests of big pharma, where we're looking for different collaborations, whether it's investors or small biotechs, et cetera. So it varies significantly, and I think, to be honest, the earlier stage projects that we have are most likely going to be picked up by smaller biotechs, down some of them at least, because they're willing to take a risk. So we have a project for peritoneal dialysis currently. So there's only a few companies that are out there in the space, so we're looking to form a company around that ourselves. We'll do that for anything that we really like on our own. So we've formed a number of spin-out companies. It can either be a program which is not of big pharma interest, or for example, we have a project to prevent hypoglycemia in diabetics and insulin-dependent diabetics, where the industry needs more validation in terms of getting some clinical data. So we've put a company around these assets and then get them funding and then take them into the clinic.
So the model there is that these big companies, in partnership with your CDRD network, create a pool of funds that you jointly make investment decisions about there in terms of using those funds.
It used to be jointly, but I guess now what we do is we present to them about 20 to 30 projects a year in their areas of interest, and they decide whether or not they want to fund them themselves.
Oh, so you basically pitch them to them.
Yes. Yes.
And so you're not holding their funds. They've earmarked some funds for investing on your.
Yeah, they're essentially drawdown funds, and what's great about the way these funds work is that basically if they say yes, we can start right away. We give them a project plan and a budget, and they decide whether or not they'd like to fund. So we have relationships with, I think, 52 universities across the world. So if any of your researchers have, anti-inflammatory or, unique projects, they can send them my way or to our project search team, and we would do an initial evaluation, both scientific and commercial. And then if we like things, then we would present them to our funds. It's really pretty straightforward, and it's also non-dilutive for the investigator, which is great.
Well, that's a really interesting model. So does CDRD actually put in any investment on the project, or their investment is the preparation of the proposal?
Yeah, so we'll do what we call, I guess, wet lab due diligence, and we'll repeat the investigator's data on our own dime, I guess. And then, put some time in the development plan, and then also do the work. So we do some in kind. We also support grant writing for investigators as well. So it's pretty multifactorial in terms of what we do.
So for the AllerGen investigators on the line, CDRD's clearly got a service model, and if you are doing drug development type of research or mechanisms of action type of research that might lead to drug development or disease modifications, then this may be an opportunity to make note of post-AllerGen when the projects are finished and you're looking for a pathway to commercialization or a pathway to further development, where CDRD could become a next stage partner for the AllerGen researchers and trainees on their projects. That's excellent. So what other services does CDRD offer within Canada for Canadian researchers and trainees? Do you have any other programs there?
Yeah, so we have a pretty extensive trainee program, both postdocs and co-ops, where they actually learn all the basics of drug development. We have seminars, I think, once every couple weeks, and it goes through, all of the various groups within CDRD, such as, target validation, screening, PK, pharm tox, chemistry, biology. I do a BD presentation, I think, once or twice a year. And then, also we work with investigators. We can take very early projects. We can help foreign companies. We can do business development, market analysis. And so that's when a project was in I guess the investigator world, the academic world. But then if it's in a Canadian company, we can also work with small to medium enterprises in Canada. Through the Canadian, we received funding from the federal government last year, and that allows us to work with small companies as well within Canada to do the work, whether it's business development or scientific work. So we go all the way up until, I would say, IND-enabling toxicology studies, both from a academic and a company standpoint.
So those SMEs, spin-off companies with a research discovery protected inside them, you would work with those companies take them right up to the level of the drug regulatory phase?
Yeah. So the way that would work is a bit different in that the company has to provide, I guess, 50% of what the project would normally cost in return for a downstream return. And then, if it's a larger project, we can actually take equity in the companies.
Right. So it's a shared cost model.
Yeah. I mean, so for example, Vita Therapeutics, which is a company here in Vancouver, they have granzyme inhibitors. I don't know if you guys have heard of them, but we've been working with them, I guess, for a couple of years now, and really trying to position them for the Canadian MS Society. So, looking at the role of granzyme B in progressive MS. So I put together a business case with them, so they've been able to go out and pitch their technology to various companies within the MS space. And then also we help them get the patient samples to see if the granzyme B target is in the progressive MS patient samples. And then, so once we did that, we went back to the Canadian MS Society, and now we have a project that's ongoing with them. And I think that's been announced. So.
Oh, that's a great success story. We've got some young investigators, and some of them are looking at a research career. Some of them are looking at an entrepreneurial career or a business career. What kind of advice would you give to them, knowing what you know about the current market and the opportunities? Where are the big opportunities? What kind of skills and attitudes will really help make you successful in the current environment and in the environment in the next 5 years?
Sure. So I think, realistically, the educational opportunities, if you want to, I guess, move from the lab to business development type, deal, you could go get an MBA. But I think the value of MBAs is probably going down a bit, given that there's so many opportunities to get them. But from my standpoint, if I had to do it again, I would probably go to law school, because everything we look at is through contracts. So understanding contracts, understanding the language, understanding market analysis, all that type of information is quite important. I think there's tremendous value in going to a larger company for a while, 2 to 3 years at least, and understanding how they look at all these type of things. You get the training you get in a big company is quite significant, and I would prioritize companies such as like Biogen IDEC or Gilead, sort of the larger biotechs which are doing very well. And then, from there you can come back, work for smaller companies, etc. Yeah, that's what I would do. So.
That's interesting. So a law degree, and then head into a big company to get a breadth of experience, and then take it from there.
Yeah, and I think over time, if you look at the Canadian scene right now, essentially you've got Valiant, and they don't really do research that much. So it's sort of a different type of model, but you've got, some biotechs which are doing relatively well right now, such as Equinox, Zymeworks, here in Vancouver, and then Mars Innovation is spinning out a number of companies in the Toronto area. And I know over time, given what we're working on, that we'll see more companies coming out across Canada. We're working on one which I hope to launch in Halifax. So, I think the biotech scene has been hit pretty hard in Canada, from the 2008, 2009 timeframe, but we're slowly building it back. And then I also, looking at Versant Ventures coming to Canada, both in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. I think that's fantastic. And then that's sort of bringing in other groups as well. I mean, we've seen a number of investors coming through and trying to figure out how it may work in Canada. I think the research here is top notch, and then over time the commercialization will catch up.
Well, that's one of the things that they say about Canada. Our scientists are among the top in the world. Our training for scientists is among the top in the world. We just have to create that ecostructure, that ecosystem that will support entrepreneurship and support innovation and reap the benefits in Canada. What do you see happening on that front? Are we making any inroads?
I hope so. That's why CDRD is here, and then you've got groups like Mars, you've got Neomed, Amrichem, and then all at the top really you've got bigger venture capital funds, right? So you've got CTI raised some money. We're writing a letter of support for another group that's trying to raise a lot of funds within Canada. And I think over time it's going to increase. And I also think that the drop in the Canadian dollar is going to help bring American money in as well, because it's a discount to what they would be seeing in the States. I think over time a few of these companies will succeed. Some of them will fail, but ultimately, I think there's a real passion to create viable biotech companies in Canada and keep them here. So we'll see over the next few years how that plays out.
Mm-hmm. So, and I'm going to ask you a personal question. What advice have you received that helped you the most in your career? Given you're in a very demanding field, it's very multidisciplinary, and what do you fall back on to keep your head straight in this complex environment in which you're trying to work?
That's a good question. I think ultimately a lot of the skills for this job aren't things that you learn in school, right? So, I think if you have the basics, if you have a PhD or MS or understand science and be able to articulate it quite easily, that's good. For me, what's been the most helpful is just really being passionate about biotech and looking at blogs, papers, understanding the funding patterns, understanding the business models. You've got biotechs which have a different business model, virtual biotechs which have a different business model and skills, and then groups like CDRD. And I think I moved to Canada about 10 years ago, really understanding the tremendous support for early stage research, or more translational research, probably not early stage research with the cuts in CIHR. But for scientific ideas right now, you can get IRAP support, you can get POP grants, although that's gone away. There's a lot of different avenues. There's a very vibrant angel investing scene in Canada. I mean, there's a lot of different opportunities to get things sort of bootstrapped to the point where they're investable. And I think, given the incestuous nature of, at least in Vancouver, everybody sort of knows each other, so you have to behave yourself, and you can't anger everyone. That's for sure.
How important are those soft skills, communications, relationship building, networking? We're both in NCEs, and networks is in our name, but in practice, what is the role of networking, and what does it mean to you in terms of your own personal path to success as well as to your organization?
Yeah, for me personally, I think, for example, I was at QLT for 8 years. They had a massive layoff. I think, my network got me this job within, a few months, or a couple months actually. So, the day after I got let go, somebody called me that's on the board of CDRD and said, would you be interested in this job? So, I think networking is great. I think it doesn't need to be some sort of targeted networking. You just have to, be reasonable and, be interested in what people are doing. But you need to know folks because, the Canadian biotech scene is quite small compared to some other areas, and I would say that there's really nowhere to hide. Your reputation means a lot, and people will, find out about you. If everybody doesn't like you, it's going to be tough for you to find a position. If certain people have issues with you, that's to be expected, I guess. So, being, upfront and honest really helps, I think.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Where, in your opinion, right now are the beehives of activity, the hubs that are both magnets and also preparing the next generation? That really, something's really happening there, aside from CDRD where you work.
Yeah, no, I think, obviously CDRDs, we've got a lot of good things going on, but I think, obviously, there's groups like the 2020 network in that are doing ophthalmology type research. I think that's going to be of interest. There's a lot of Canadian consortia in terms of like epigenetics, multiple sclerosis, and I think those are sort of the untapped projects, et cetera. There's a group that's actually looking at developing animal models for rare disorders, and I think it's one of the principals is Phil Heater here at UBC, but that's a pan-Canadian initiative as well. The Genome Science Centers are also supporting a lot of research. They're changing their mandates a bit in terms of commercialization as well. I think there's a lot of activity, and the J Labs in Toronto is a big deal, and I think over time, it's really, the Canadian research has proven itself, and I think more and more over time we're going to see more groups coming here, but also hopefully some more homegrown type funds develop to get these companies to the point where they have enough people to get projects into the clinic and ultimately hire people, right? So given the issues with the oil sands and all that, I think differentiating and making the economy a bit more open to technologies would be a good thing for all of us.
Well, thank you. All right, here's a chance for someone to put a question into the website and ask it if they'd like. They got their hand up, Marshall?
No hands visible.
Well, nonetheless, we've had a very interesting discussion with you today, Jonathan. Thank you so much. I think I'd like to thank everyone who has attended this webinar today for your thoughtful engagement and attention to our speaker. We hope it's been useful to you. I think there's a lot more detail here that you would be invited to follow up on the CDRD website or with Jonathan directly. Please contact Marshall if you're interested in doing that, because I think Jonathan's in a very special place in the CDRD network to have a perspective on innovation, technology development for drug development and support. And he would, I know, in the spirit of being an NC, be very happy to lend a hand to connect you to the people that he knows that can help move your project or your vision and goals forward. So again, Jonathan, thank you so much. Special thanks to you for joining us today for your slides. And I will just wrap up by inviting everyone to join us for our next webinar, which will feature Brian Underdown. He is with Lumira Capital. We heard about capital today from Jonathan, how important those investment partners are, and his talk will be about how to attract investment and partners to your research and your science-related projects. So again, Jonathan, thank you very much, and thanks to all our participants. And Marshall, again, thank you very much for facilitating the webinar today.
Thanks.